Brew Strong is brought to you by Blickman Engineering, home of the Riptide. Visit them online at blickmanengineering.com.
Brewers, it's time for the beer radio you've been looking for. This is the show that dispels myths, tackles the toughest topics, and makes no apologies for geeking out on beer. Hosted by two guys that drink before they think, Jamil Zainasheff and John Palmer. This is Brew Strong.
Hey, howdy, hey, my brewing brothers and sisters.
Greetings, Cretans.
Well, at least you messed up this time.
Yeah. 2 for 2.
There you go.
Oh, well. That looks like good beer. What are you drinking?
Drinking our California IPA. You know, it's funny because we're live on Facebook. People can ask questions as they will in the chat, the comment section. And Leaf is he was asking, I've done a session version of the Good Books American Pale Ale, and it is going down with my friends like crazy. It's a fantastic recipe, which I will never stop to brew. In the last show, you had some California IPA on the show. Jamel, would you share that recipe? Maybe. Well, you know, I think I would be happy to share that recipe. However, I'm thinking, you know, it would be a great addition to the second version of Brewing Classic Styles.
Yes.
I think that there's where. So it's interesting. You know, I put my heart and soul and life into those recipes in the first Brewing Classic Styles.
Right.
And there was some chatter on Reddit about, well, you know, it'd be great to see another one, or maybe you're not going to capture magic in a bottle a second time. I don't know. But I do know that there was so much left out of that first book.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that made it better. I think it kind of narrowed the focus. So it had focus. Yeah. It was like, look, just brew these things. I think, you know, providing some of this additional information, plus information I've garnered over the ensuing 13, 14 years.
Oh, yeah.
Since that was written. Mm-hmm. I've learned a lot, and there's a lot that's changed in beer and ingredients. I have a lot to say.
I wouldn't doubt it.
I'm thinking I could throw in a lot of great new recipes. I think I could fill those recipes out. I think I could explain why it is you're doing what you're doing with that recipe, and why and how you would change it, how you would tweak it, how you would, you know, how you would make it your own, but still stay in the style and perhaps make it even more award-winning. The purpose of those recipes in the previous book was these will win you awards. You know, go with these. Everybody's going to like these, you know, and if you're drinking with your friends, they're going to enjoy it more. So that was kind of the purpose behind that. But, you know, I always felt bad about not including a lot more
background and
detail.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Here's why, you know, we're choosing this ingredient. Here's the range for that ingredient. You know, go ahead and do this, do that, but here's what you're trying to focus on, you know, and then providing maybe even more recipes versus just the one recipe. So it's kind of limited to one recipe at a time in there. Yeah. Ray, I mean, God bless Ray for making it happen in the first place and believing in doing this book. But he was also like, look, we're on a page count. You can't just, you know, throw a whole bunch of other information in there. So information got really condensed on that. So I'd love to do that.
He did say it was the best manuscript that he had ever been presented. So
really,
yeah.
He didn't tell me that.
Oh, well, he told me. Yeah.
He didn't want me to get a swelled head.
Probably that's
jokes on him.
Yeah, but that would be cool to do. And as you say, I mean, styles have changed.
Right.
More ingredients, different ingredients are available.
Right. Ways of brewing, a lot of ways of thinking have really changed. So I'm gonna try and knock that out as soon as I can. Leopold says he's drinking a couple of Nugnia number 100 brewed from the episode from back in 2010 on the Can You Brew It. Damn fine beer. There you go. All right. So we're going to do Q&A.
Right.
There's a couple ways you can get your questions in on this show. One is to email our dear friend, John Blickman at Blickman Engineering, feedback at blickmanengineering.com. Tell him how much you appreciate that he pays for the show. And then ask him your question. And then if he passes it on to us, guaranteed it's going to be on the show.
That's right.
There's Second way, email us, brewstrong at thebrewingnetwork.com. And you won't get an immediate response, but within 20 years, I promise you, we will answer your question. The third way is if you're listening live on Facebook when we're doing these shows, you can put your questions in the chat and then we can answer them. And you get a pretty good, I think you get a 50-50 on that.
Yeah.
So there you go.
And at least Bevo reads them.
She does, but I don't think she's there right now.
Oh.
Because I don't see. How do I see all the comments that have scrolled past? Unfortunately, I don't. So I missed somebody's question. Well, there you go. That's the way it goes. But luckily, people have written in. So
we have email.
We're going to start off with one of these, and then somebody asked a question. I didn't see it. It's not in the chat, so there you go. You should have emailed it, or you should have emailed Blickman about it. BlickmanEngineering.com. Fine people, smart people. Let's see. Clayton was asking, I made a Saison with White Labs Saison blend 568. After fermentation and conditioning, I kegged and crashed, forgetting to slowly crash. While crashing, I also set my regulator to 60 plus PSI so it would carbonate quickly. My question is, why after adding 1 ounce of biofine twice, 2 days apart, is my beer still hazy after 4 days? Should I use gelatin instead? I'm thinking it is just whatever powdery strain of yeast that is in the blend is floating on the CO2 in suspension at 60 psi at carb in less than a day or less to above normal Saison carb levels. Does that make sense? Any other ideas? Does gelatin do better to clarify than biofine? If not, I'm not a vegan vegetarian. It was gotten a little clearer every day, but seems 4 days near freezing is excessive.
Well, I'm wondering, is he simply, every time he pours, is he sucking yeast up into the dip tube? Because that can happen. So even though it's settled, he's still sucking up haze when he pours. That being said, I think gelatin would probably form more of a sediment mass than the biofine. I think the biofine is more easily disturbed. What's your experience with biofine?
Yeah, biofine, you have to be careful with biofine. You can use too much biofine, and you'll get what's called fluffy bottoms. And the fluffy bottoms, it won't pack down tight. You have to use exactly the correct amount of biofine for the beer you're finding. It works quite well. It's a great product, especially if you need to be vegan friendly. But what you need to do is get yourself some cones and in your lab, take the beer that you're trying to find and then try different dosing levels. And what you'll find is there'll be a level. There'll be too little, which leaves behind a lot of haze. And then it'll get to a level where it's perfect. Beer drops brilliantly clear. There's a nice tight little pack at the bottom. And we all want a little tight pack at the bottom. That's our ideal in the brewing industry, a tight pack at the bottom. And then as you increase your dosage, it starts becoming a fluffier and fluffier bottom. I know some people are cool with a fluffy bottom, but really what you're shooting for is a tight pack at the bottom. And as it gets fluffier, it also tends to not take a lot of stuff out of solution. So I think, a couple of things. I think, you're right, John, that you may be drawing off some yeast and other sediment there. Gelatin tends to, even if you put too much, form a nice tight pack and end up being like a brick at the bottom, and does not tend to have fluffy bottoms and that problem. So, and gelatin tends to pull yeast out better than biofine does. Biofine tends to do much better on
polyphenol haze.
Protein tannin complexes and not yeast. So if it's yeast that's in there, gelatin's your go-to. So I think 4 days at freezing, I don't think you're going to see when you're talking about fine yeast. I don't think that's going to really make any difference. You need to, if you're talking about the yeast, you want it to get into kind of a shutdown zone, a flocculation zone, right? And what happens is the yeast have decided to flocculate, and going colder does not make them flocculate quicker. It makes the liquid more dense and actually slows the drop from top to bottom in a colder liquid. So it can actually inhibit that the yeast are going to drop. So if you just give it time, even at freezing, it'll eventually reach the bottom. It just takes time. And keep in mind that, especially in a tall, slender tank in a brewery or in a corny keg, the top may be brilliantly clear. But what's happening is all that is falling down and becoming more and more concentrated towards the bottom of your tank. So you may be drawing off, hazy stuff, and you've got a very clear apparently top
layer, but a hazy bottom layer.
Right. So you cannot judge the entire tank based off of that. All right. For some reason, I lost my video. I don't know what the hell's going on. This is. I said something bad about somebody, and now I'm getting screwed for it. All right. So good question, Clayton. Hopefully we answered that for you. Let's take a short break, and when we come back, we'll have more of your questions right after this.
Hey, it's Kaylee Cuoco for Priceline. Ready to go to your happy place for a happy price? Well, why didn't you say so? Just download the Priceline app right now and save up to 60% on hotels. So whether it's Cousin Kevin's Kazoo Concert in Kansas City, go Kevin, or Becky's Bachelorette Bash in Bermuda, you never have to miss a trip ever again. So download the Priceline app today. Your savings are waiting.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
Are you looking for a simple brewing system that's great for all grain brewing, but everything on the market seems to be full of compromises? Blickman Engineering has the answer. The Blickman Brew Easy All Grain Brewing System. The Brew Easy is a complete system with easy upgrades and a beautiful compact design, perfect for any size brewing location. At its core, the Brew Easy is built on two gorgeous Blickman Boilermaker brew kettles, a high-temperature March pump, and either a top-tier gas burner or the new Boil Coil electric heater. The Brew Easy adapter lid allows the pots to stack on top of each other, forming an efficient, strong, and compact brewing setup that comes in 5, 10, and 20-gallon batch sizes. Upgrade your Brew Easy system with full automated control by adding a Blickman Tower of Power temp controller, and make moving around easy with the Blickman Kettle Cart. The Brew Easy is modular. If you already own a Boilermaker kettle, you can build your Brew Easy by purchasing just the modules you need. The new Brew Easy all-grain brewing system. See it today at BlickmanEngineering.com and brew with Blickman quality on your new Brew Easy.
back to the two guys that know how to turn beer into beer. This is Brew Strong.
All right, we're back. We're answering some of your questions here live on Facebook, Brew Strong. If you had a question and we missed it, just ask it again. There you go.
Yep.
Just post it in the chat. We'll be happy to do it. There you go. Rodrigo is asked for the benefits of Trub in fermentation. He says, "Greetings from Brazil.
One of my favorite places.
You've been, how many times you've been to Brazil now?"
Oh, probably 9. I think.
Nine.
Yeah.
I get asked every year. It's like, sorry, conflicts with this. Sorry, conflicts with that. Then finally they go like, "We'll ask you a year in advance." I'm like, wise move. Oh, yeah. No pandemic. Can't do that.
Yeah. I think I've even been there, 3 times in 1 year.
There you go. Mike Schumacher is also saying, Jamil could write a recipe book just on his beers posted on the confessional at Heretic. Any great ones? There are a lot of new recipes that I've developed over the years and fine-tuned to really be popular. So I would be happy to include every last one of those. See, the thing is, we do Brewing Classic Styles again. New book. Mm-hmm. It's going to be like Encyclopedia Britannica. It's going to be one massive freaking book. It's going to be a big chunky book, and to put all that paper in, the publishers aren't going to be happy. But I don't care at this point. I'm just going to.
I think they'll look at the likely popularity of said book, and they will have no problems with our page count.
I just don't care at this point. I'm just going to do what I'm going to do, and that's what's going to happen. All right. So Rodrigo says, in the Sulfites show, Jamil said that he thinks the benefits of taking some Trub to the fermentation vessel comes from the nucleation points and the smaller concentration of CO2. So my question is there any way to imitate this without oxidizing the beer, like a stir plate? Are there any disadvantages of leaving some Trub in the fermenter? Is dissolved CO2 a problem in fermenting under pressure? So, Rodrigo, first off, this is 3 questions, not 1. And you're limited to 1 question per email. So you want to separate those out in the future, but I think they are 3 excellent questions. John, when you want to tackle any one of these, is there a way to... all right, so first off, I will say, yes. When you have minimal Trub go in, you still have 10, if it looks clear to you, there's 10, 20% is Trub. It's still in there. It's in the solution. It's, broken up, unless it looks, crystal brilliantly clear, which it doesn't, you have Trub in there, and it's vastly more Trub than the yeast can use to supplement their sterols and their lipid layer that protects them. So it's just not that. It is the fact that there's nucleation points. If people can prove me wrong, go ahead. I dare you. But it's just logic tells you that. Occam's razor on this one. So the question, is there any way to imitate this without oxidizing the beer, like a stir plate? Could you put your carboy, drop a big old stir bar in there and put on a stir plate?
I think this is a case where a concern or, a factoid has been taken to an extreme. I don't think there's any real need to put a carboy on a stir plate in order to, push extra CO2 out of solution. I think, typical average amount of Trub, everything's going to work out fine. And we talked last week about, the fact in very tall cylinder conicals, you have higher hydrostatic pressure at the bottom, greater solubility of CO2 due to that pressure, therefore more yeast stress due to that higher CO2 concentration. Homebrew scale, not an issue. There's just not enough pressure to make up a concentration differential. So, I don't think there's a real need to throw a carboy on a stir plate. But yes, you could. And it doesn't have to be a big stir bar. Even a 1-inch stir bar will provide enough motion in the absence of yeast activity to, again, agitate and cause nucleation and growth of gas bubbles.
Well, and I'd be very careful about doing this because the beer that we know today that we love, the presence of CO2 acts as a suppressor to yeast activity. If you get rid of that, you're going to encourage, some of the suppression of the yeast and some compounds that are produced. I think maybe you're helping the yeast ferment. Are you helping the yeast produce better beer? I doubt that. I'd be very careful of that. I think you're going to end up producing flavors that you don't want. So, I would just be careful about that.
Yeah, we are in the fermentation environment. We are dealing with an ecosystem, and it's much the same kind of argument as you say. Well, wouldn't the oceans be a better place if we got rid of all the sharks? No, because that is the ecosystem. That is, it is in balance, and it works because of the sharks being there. Same way with the carbon dioxide in the beer.
There you go. Any disadvantage to leaving some of the Trub in the fermenter? My take is one, you might get less yield overall. Who knows? Or maybe you get better yield, but stability may suffer with carrying over a lot of the fatty acids that are present in the Trub.
Yeah. Excess Trub, you could have stability issues with excess fatty acids.
There you go. Is dissolved CO2 a problem in fermenting under pressure? Well, no, that's the reason why you ferment under pressure, is to increase the dissolved CO2. And what that does is suppress yeast activity, so you can ferment a little warmer. Again, you're kind of messing with perfection here. John?
No, I agree. I think it's a pretty good system. Yes, you can ferment under pressure if you want to. As Jamil says, it is. By doing so, you will suppress some esters. You can ferment a little bit warmer as a result and get a similar profile to different conditions, but you really don't need to push the system around like that.
All right. Leaf is asking, how are the stats on cold crashing these days? About the production of esters by rapid cold crashing. I talked about this in the yeast book. He says, all right, so yes. So here's one of the things. If you are cold crashing a beer, if you take a beer down rapidly, or if you take yeast down rapidly in temperature, they will, I've seen a study on this that says they will express far more ester forming compounds in the cold crashing, as they release this in protecting themselves from freezing, essentially. That's kind of what the yeast assumes going on. They suck it up and get rid of it. They abandon all baggage and they get ready for cold times. And so this is what happens under a quick cold crashing. If you're, which may we do that for ales here. We're fine with that. With lagers, however, we take it down, 3 degrees Fahrenheit in the morning, 3 degrees Fahrenheit at night, And over the course of a day, we only go down 6 degrees Fahrenheit. And the reason for that is to prevent the yeast. That's about as fast as you can bring yeast down and not have them express these ester positive compounds. So that's why we do it. And I think that it's critical if you want to have a really clean lager to not cold crash it rapidly. Let's see here. Gino asks, what is the best way to make the syrupy, sugary, sweet, no lactose imperial pastry stouts? Tons of crystal, maltodextrin. What do you think, John?
He wants to make
a syrupy,
pastry stout,
sugary, sweet pastry stout with no lactose.
No lactose. Well, then in that case, I would say high mash temperature, high gravity. You wouldn't necessarily want to use any sugar adjuncts like, PNCO or stuff like that, because those generally are sucrose type sugars with only a low percentage of color, dark dextrins. I think a high mash temperature and some crystal malts will provide the residual sweetness that you're looking for in a pastry stout.
Yeah, I think, avoiding simple sugars, or, if you're going to make an imperial, go crazy on the simple sugars and, to where your yeast craps out and then the simple sugars are left over and then you can make it syrupy sweet. I think you want to avoid making truly syrupy sweet beers. Sweetness, we make one called Monster Cookie that I want it to taste like a chocolate chip cookie, which is sweet, right? It has to be sweet. You can't not make it sweet. So we do that by, a number of factors, but it's not syrupy sweet. I think syrupy sweet's a mistake. Let's see here. Carlos is asking, I have a lot of problems with my grain bed not staying compact while lautering. I have a rim set up and do recirculation throughout the mash. Seems like at times the grain fluffs up and makes it almost impossible to get it to settle and set a grain bed. I usually start with 10-minute dough in before I start the pump because this was something I had read recommended from the Blickman Tower of Power manual. During this 10-minute dough in is when the grain seems to fluff up. Even if it does compact itself down later on during the louder sparge, when I slow the pump down, the grain bed will rise up and get really loose and grain will make its way into the boil kettle. Recirculation rate during the mash is 0.75 to 1 gallon a minute. I drop it down to a quarter to a half gallon a minute during the lautering. Is there something I might be doing wrong, or is there anything I can do to keep my grain bed in place while doing the louder sparge into the boil kettle?
Is he running the pump backwards?
Oh, well, who knows?
I mean, he should be drawing down through the false bottom.
I did not think about that, but that could be the case. I mean, it could be even that the hoses are connected incorrectly, right? Yeah. You could mix up those connections. It's very easy to do. It's it's a mistake all of us have made. Mm-hmm. So that's certainly a possibility. I would check that. Just check everything because it doesn't sound right. If you have any liquid, even just gravity flow out of a mash tun, it will draw down the grains. You'll have a fairly compacted grain bed. You won't see stuff floating up.
Right.
The liquid that you put in, I suppose you could shoot a stream of water in and stir up the top of the grain bed, but the rest of the grain bed's still going to be pretty compacted. Yeah. So I think John may be onto something here. That maybe the pump's flowing in the wrong direction. The other thought is, I don't know. I
mean, I often, even when I'm brewing and doing recirculation with the pump going the right way, I will have some grain floating around the top. But, the thickness of that floating grain is maybe a quarter inch. I mean, it's not a lot of material floating around.
Right.
So maybe he's just confusing that with a thinking it's worse than it is.
Maybe this is the problem. It's hard to one of the things, Carlos, you might do is send us a video of what you're experiencing, and maybe we can help that way.
Yep.
Or send us airplane tickets, and we'll come out and we'll brew with you, and we'll see really what's going on.
There you go.
I mean, yeah, sounds like fun to me. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's where Carlos is. If he's in like Bakersfield, it's actually it's not that far. So
yeah.
On the other hand, it's Bakersfield. So I mean, we'll see. Mm-hmm. All right. Quick break. When we come back, we will have more of your questions right after this.
Very good.
Learning to brew has never been so disgusting. This is Brew Strong.
All right, we're back. We're taking listener questions, and Carlos had mentioned his kind of fluffy mash. Travis was suggesting maybe not enough liquid on the top of the mash. I think less liquid. If you had not enough liquid, it would all lay down tight because there'd be nothing to float up. I think he's seen it float up in the liquid. Yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds like sounds more like too much liquid in the.
Yeah, but even then, I don't see that. If you have any draw coming out of your mash tun, it pretty much sucks it down, every grain. It doesn't take much to make a grain to come down out of the liquid. Any sort of flow, and it pretty much sucks tight. I mean, the standard problem is that the flow is too much, and you end up with a stuck mash.
Right.
I don't know if that's the issue. Let's see here. From Tom, he says, can you provide some tips on how to pitch the right amount of yeast with a starter? I enjoy making Belgian beers with a noticeable yeast flavor, which from what I've read requires a pitch rate of around 0.5 to 0.75 cells degrees Plato millwort. I always use liquid yeast. According to most calculators I've found on the internet, by the time I buy the liquid yeast, there aren't enough cells to reach that pitch rate. Yet if I grow a starter and pitch the whole thing, I'm pitching well above my target rate. When I've used the starter, I've found that the high pitch rate has yielded little to no yeast flavor. Important to note, I always brew 3 gallons of beer at a time, as I'm the only beer drinker in the family. Any thoughts on how to hit the right pitch rate without buying a ton of additional equipment? All right. Tom, interesting questions. Lots of questions. And this is one of those things where, I mean, again, you have to control a lot of different parameters. And, it may be the addition of oxygen. It may be the gravity of the wort. It may be the fermentation temperature. It may be the starting and finishing fermentation temperature. It may be, nutrient related. It may be, the strain related. There's a lot of different parameters here. But what I would do if you are, so here's one thing about the at least my pitch rate calculator was, you can't assume that a package of yeast was treated properly before you got it. So the thing that I do in my pitch rate calculators, make sure that you are going to produce a well attenuated beer that is properly fermented. Okay.
So more
So,
attenuation rather than
well,
less.
if it's going to air, it's going to air on the side of more when
Higher pitch rate.
the yeast is old.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
If the yeast is fresh, you can go less, and that's what it does. The point is, trust it. It will always get you some really good beer, fermentation wise. If you're lacking in flavor and you're using that, I would, perhaps look at a different strain of yeast, or I would look at, if you are in, for some reason, if you're
If you're in Akron, Ohio.
So I mean, you just have to be careful. If you have good provenance on your yeast health, then I would assume it's more healthy. And so what I would do if I was Tom is I would try just pitching whatever yeast direct. I don't think he is wrong on the half to 0.75. I think, again, it depends on the wort composition and oxygen and other things. One of the things he's talking about Belgians, Belgians tend to be higher gravity. And here's one of the things that can help with a Belgian beer is go ahead and do your pitch rate. But if it's 1080 or above, or even, kind of around there, it's not a hard and fast rule. I say 1080, but that's generally where it starts. Maybe a little lower, maybe a little higher. Add another dose of oxygen. Wait 8 hours, 10 hours, 14 hours, add another dose of oxygen. A couple of things are going to happen. It's going to attenuate more, which once you reduce those background sugars, a lot of the flavor will tend to pop. If you're not getting full attenuation, like it should with some of these Belgian beers or Belgian yeast, it'll mask the character of fermentation. The other thing about adding a little bit of oxygen, you're going to promote certain flavors and compounds, and I think that may be the secret here for Tom. Try that additional dose of oxygen if you're not already doing it. Maybe he already is. I don't know. But I would try adding another dose of oxygen. I would try just starting with the yeast as you get it from the manufacturer. I would try, one of the other things is buy a copy of the yeast book in there. If I was 100% sober at this point, I could tell you exactly how to check yeast concentration without much equipment at all. It was, I can't remember the exact numbers, but if you can dilute yeast to where it just looks hazy in a test tube, then you can assume that's a certain concentration of yeast, and then you can kind of go from there. Problem is, it may not be viable yeast. So I think the thing to do, Tom, is not buy equipment, but just try a batch with the yeast as it comes. Try, and see, this is another thing I need to do. I need to get rid of the brewery so I can do more yeast calculations, and I've got some brilliant ideas for yeast calculators that nobody else has even thought of yet. And also a new book, a couple of new books, another yeast book, another brewing process sauce, and then I got another book. I got three that I need to do. And then, I think.
I have a suggestion too.
Yeah, there you go. Go for it, John.
How about open fermentation? 1 package of yeast, 3 gallons, open fermentation. Now, which would mean covered, but not sealed with an airlock. So the beer, the yeast, would have this access to oxygen. And I think many Belgian strains are actually used in open fashion in the old country.
There you go. All right. Mike Shoemaker, he was asking, Jamil, can you give specifics on your quarantine quad? OG, FG, hot blend, 13.6 ABV, knock you out tastiness. Quarantine quad. All right. So I don't have that in front of me, and things are getting hazy at this point. Email me and I'll give you the recipe for quarantine quad. All right. Let's take a short break. And when we come back, we will have more of your questions right after this.
Back to the beer guys that make other beer guys look like wine guys. Brew strong.
All right, we're back. Let's see here. We answered Tom's question. Gino is asking, what brewing classic style recipe do you hate the most now after all the years? Ooh,
that's a good one.
Gino, I don't know.
I mean, for me, it'd be a style that I don't care for, which would be the Rogan beer. But, I don't have the same ownership of the recipes that you do.
I would, all right. So all the recipes are really, really good. I would tweak a few of them. One would be perhaps the lambic section.
Okay.
Because I've got 10 more years experience or 15 more years experience in the lambic section. And there are certain subtleties that are important, especially in fruited lambics, that I've gotten really dialed in. The other would be, not that I hate, but, the IPAs and pale ales that have shifted dramatically over the years. Right. So there's, the New England IPAs, there's, there's just picking one IPA recipe to put in a book is a giant pain in the ass because and the way I decided which recipe went in, which recipe didn't was, well, this one won the most awards. This is the most award winning. That was my, if I was like, well, I really like this one better. No. The book is about how do you win awards, what's the most award winning. People don't want to know what my preference is. People want to know what the judge's preference is. So there were a lot of things where, I had to make that choice. I think that, there should be, a book of 100 IPA recipes.
I think Mitch did one like that.
Right. And I think that could be, there's so many ways to do an IPA and so many different, especially now with New England and some of the other milkshake and there's just a lot. So I would add more of those. I don't think I would get rid of the recipe that's in there. I think I would add to it and explain more about what you can do to truly produce great IPA of varying styles. And then I think the whole lambic thing, I've just learned so much more about that and done a lot more lab work on all the mixed culture fermentations that there I think I could do a lot more. So I think we'll. Yeah.
I think that was a good question because I know in my own book with my recipes, in going back and
I hate every one of those damn things, don't you?
Yeah. Well, I went back and looked at my crystal malt amounts and generally cut back. And I know in brewing classic styles, Munich malt is a malt that frequently appears in your recipes. Now, that may be because you are looking for that little bump in character to wake up the judges. But for example, would you tweak any of your recipes that you can think of to back off on the Munich at this point in time?
I think that, having a quality, continental Pilsner or something like that will tend to help with that. I do use Munich in some other beers like Twin and things like that to develop a richness of malt character. It really does help. So I don't know that I would reduce the Munich. There were other beers like lighter Pilsners that had some Munich in it that I would reduce that Munich in it or eliminate it altogether, because having great fermentation, having great clarity base malt,
flavor.
It really pops. But I would not eliminate Munich in a lot of the recipes. I would keep it there. I might adjust the color of the Munich because Munich has quite a range there. Tur says, do you take any active measures to avoid reduce the amount of iron, copper, and manganese in the Wurten beer in order to prevent staling and prolong beer freshness? Chelating agents, perhaps.
That's interesting. I know they talk a lot about manganese coming from hops and dry hopping.
So your answer is you don't know?
Well, I mean, I'm not.
You don't think any activate.
Yeah.
You personally don't. I don't either. Prolonging beer freshness is always, once you're commercially brewing, I think that's really, really critical. But, I think, based on, the majority of it's coming from the malt and where it was grown and where it's taking it up from the soil. Mm-hmm. So, chelating agents, I really don't know. We haven't done it at Heretic. Leaf says in the IPA book, it does not use dry hopping. It doesn't? No. Do I have it here? No, I don't have it here. I have it at home.
The IPA book?
Yeah. Do you think dry hopping for IPA is absolutely needed at this point in time, the way the style has evolved? Well, I would say this, that the definition of IPA is dry hopped. So you have to have dry hops in an IPA to truly be an IPA, right? I think that is kind of a critical thing. You can't have IPA without dry hopping. So
right.
I'm not sure that I can't imagine that the IPA book does not include dry hopping.
Yeah, I don't see it right now. I think it must be in the bathroom.
Holding the door open. Instead of a squatty potty, you've got a stack of books.
If need some reading material from time to time.
There you go. Let's see. Mike says, I'm in the same boat, Tur. I'm on a well with high iron and manganese. I mean, how do you deal with that? What would you suggest, John? Should they go to an RO system off of their well, or should they look at chelating agents? Or
yeah, there are specific treatments, resin bed kind of treatments, or green sand for manganese for another, that are not an RO system per se, but more like a water softening treatment where you pull out those specific elements, but leave the rest of the water profile the way it is.
Okay. Oh, Leaf is saying the IPA in Brewing Classic Styles does not have dry hopping. Well, then it's a piece of shit recipe, and that's the one that I would exclude from the from the book, or I would adjust. There you go. But it won awards, so there you go. I don't know. Maybe you don't need dry hopping, but I think personally, I think in order to brew a true IPA, you have to have dry hopping of some sort. Let's see here. Jacob says, I came across a question on hop extraction, a way of measuring up to obtain my intended final volume. He's got a long description of his volume. His volume was off. His evaporate maybe different. But he forgot about the dead space at the bottom of his mash tun, pre-boil volume. There was a lot of weird things going on in here. He wants to know how to estimate how this all comes out in the wash. So he was brewing his, he screwed up his final volume. He added his hops. He added more water. He miscalculated this and that. He says a standard IBU equation only uses the final volume variable. However, I'm sure hop matter absorption for a beer that went through the entire boil with a lesser pre-boil volume of 8 gallons, which was artificially increased at the end, will yield more IBU than a beer that went through the entire boil with the intended greater pre-boil volume of 9.5. Note that my pre-boil gravity was unaffected. The hop utilization factor, U as a function of pre-boil gravity, should not change. My interpretation would be a gradient scale, where the IBU calculated for each volume represents the ceiling IBU for lesser volume and the floor IBU for a higher volume. Is there a method assumption to better coverage on the actual IBU of this beer?
Well, that is an interesting question. So he's wondering about, he's saying that the concentration of the hops in the lower pre-boil volume should yield higher IBUs than if he had boiled at a larger volume down to the same final volume.
I think what he's trying to get at is, all right, given a static amount of hops, let's say 1 ounce,
sure,
2 ounce, whatever. If the liquid volume, as the liquid volume changes, grows greater for that static amount of hops, you are going to extract more bittering and more flavor, whatever. Yes? I think we can agree on that.
Yeah.
The more dilute your hops are, the more you're going to extract from them.
Yeah.
If you're down to an ounce of hops and a cup of wort, you're not extracting much of anything. If you're an ounce of hops and 10 gallons of wort, you're going to extract more from them, just because the solubility is going to increase based off of the liquid present.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the question also is, by increasing your wort gravity, you're impacting your hop extraction as well. So if your wort gravity is lower and you have that same 1 ounce of hops and let's say 5 gallons, 1 ounce of hops, but gravity is 1020, you are going to extract more than if the gravity is 1080. Is that correct?
Okay. Based on what I have read,
mm-hmm.
and this would probably be a good question for Scott Janish too. But based on what I have read, the cause and effect of reduced IBUs with increasing wort gravity is due to the protein content of the higher wort, causing more absorption of the alpha,
mm-hmm.
and the sugar concentration of the wort doesn't really enter into it.
Mm-hmm.
The concentration of sugars and the solubility of alpha acids are independent, because they are literally at milligrams per liter.
But and I'm with you. However, the way that we get more sugars in the wort is by using more grains, and you have more Trub, you have more protein.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
so
that's what's taking it up.
Yeah. And all I'm saying is I think you need to look at that as the cause, not the sugar aspect.
Yes.
Just to
100%. Yeah. I'm with you. Right.
Okay.
So what you're saying is if you were to throw in, a sack of dextrose into the wort, it's not going to take up as much of the hop, I
don't think it's going to change your IBUs.
It's not going to change your IBUs that much. It may some slight way, but it's not going to affect it as if you used, another 1,000 pounds of base malt and did it that way, because the fluffy proteins and all that, and the Trub tends to bind to the hop alpha acids, take it out. The same thing happens with zinc. So trying to get your zinc levels right. If you're brewing a beer at 8% all malt, and then you increase the ABV, to a 10 or 12% beer, you don't necessarily need to increase your zinc, because your Trub taking out a percentage of the zinc, it
hasn't changed. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I think the second part of what I wanted to say is that, so looking at the IBU equation, this model that says, okay, utilization is based on this factor for gravity and this factor for time. Yeah, that's our model. That's what we all work off. But again, keep in mind that that gravity model is not due to sugars. It is due to proteins and Trub, probably. I mean, this has not been proven.
I'm with you 100%. Yep. I've said over the years that all the models are crap. I mean, they're good, and we should use them, but understand that they are crap, that they have actually no basis in reality as to what you actually end up with. Once I had a brewery and I had a lab and I could start testing IBUs, the whole, it's all over the place.
Yeah.
None of those things. I mean, so
you stopped calculating them, right?
Right. Well, I'll tell you, the calculations, a lot of them, dead nuts on. In our shallow grave porter, flawless. I mean, the calculation says we'd be at 33 IBUs. We're at like 33, 33.1. I mean, we're within, like, it's perfect. It is absolutely ideal. However, it's all over the place on other things. It hasn't taken into account modern brewing. All those calculations are from the past, and I'm not sure we can really ascertain what. And, we talk about Trub and the wort, but it's also yeast, especially in these beers with a lot of more yeast present or other material present. It just doesn't apply anymore. I still think you should use it because it gives you a benchmark when you are developing a recipe to say, well, it's going to be around here, it's going to be around there, and then you can try going plus or minus. But you shouldn't count on that as being calculated. Strictly. All right. We got one more question here. We're going to go a little long, but we're going to try and get this one in. Okay. Jeremy was asking. He says, John, the method I formulated below was essentially extracted by my interpretation of your methods from How to Brew. I have great success no matter what yeast strain I use, but I have two questions. One, I understand to slowly decrease temps by 2 to 3 degrees a day. I assume he means Fahrenheit. With the glycol chiller during cold conditioning. However, just to put heat wraps, which allow me to get from 64 to 73 in just 3 hours for my plus 9 degrees diacetyl rest, which normally takes 3 days. this rapid heating okay for the beer? If you're going up 9 degrees 3 days, that's no problem. 2, if you see anything wonky or misunderstood from your books, would you please correct it or add? I like to use this below to spread my method with other brewers. 1, I use 3 conicals outfitted with glycol coils, 3 heat wraps, 3 inverted hot cold dual temperature controls, and 3 hydrometers to gauge probable gravity. He uses USO5, which has a recommendation of 64 to 82 degrees. Don't use USO5 at 82 degrees. 64 to 72. 64 to 74. 67 to 70 sounds better to me. The adaptation phase, first 12 to 24 hours, go -2 degrees from the lowest recommended, so 62 degrees. I think you go -2 to the absolute recommended. I think you maybe, and we've talked about this on the show, maybe you start out a little lower than what your ideal fermentation is. The idea is to suppress diacetyl, acetaldehyde, things like that.
So 64 as opposed to 68 is what I would think.
Or 66.
Yeah.
Instead of 68. I could see that. Going 62 sounds aggressive and may produce more sulfur.
Mm-hmm.
High growth phase. Day 2, approximately 6 to 7. 60. I don't know what day 2, approximately 6 to 7. I don't know what the approximately 6 to 7 means. When gravity's within 0.002 from final gravity. Oh, okay. 6 to 7 days in.
Okay.
I don't know what day 2 means then. So at the end, you want it at the 64 degree. No. Again, I would pitch a little bit lower than your ideal fermentation temperature, because once it gets going, you want it at your ideal fermentation temperature, which would be, in this case, maybe 68, 67, 68, 69. High growth phase. All right. Maturation phase. Then the first part of the final stage, diacetyl rest, plus 9 degrees. You don't need to necessarily go up 9 degrees. If you start a little cooler, you don't need to go up so high at the end.
Yeah.
Going up really high at the end can produce lysis characters. So let's say 73 degrees for 1 to 3 days without the wraps. Takes 3 days to get up to room ambient. It's only really 24 hours at 73 degrees.
Again, you're not trying to drive a particular temperature. All you're trying to do is maintain yeast activity.
Yes.
And so the point being that, towards the end of the fermentation, you don't want the temperature to fall. You want to keep it active.
Yes. So don't start quite so cold.
Mm-hmm.
Go in that average range. And then towards the end, as it wants to rise and as things are finishing out, not at 0.0002, but when there's several degrees left, maybe several degrees Plato left, maybe at that point you take off the chilling and don't be so aggressive on the chilling. Let it naturally rise, and maybe it only rises to 70 degrees.
Yeah.
It's okay if you're starting at 66 and when you pitch, and then it quickly comes up to 68 over the next 24 hours, great. And then kind of cruise along at 68 and then take the chilling off and let it rise up to 70. Perfect. The yeast keeps active throughout that process. And that's what you want is active yeast, because the active yeast, you don't want too active at the start, because then it just goes nuts and throws off all sorts of compounds.
Right.
But you want it active at the end where it will clean up a lot of the compounds that it's done. Second part of the maturation phase is cold conditioning. That's where the yeast clean up my brew. The yeast, so cleaning up the brew is a benefit at the end, but you want it to be clean at the beginning. You want, it's like trying to raise a child. If you raise a child with no control and the child's a maniac, when they're teenagers or when they're adults, that is not the time to straighten them up.
Right.
You need to do it from the beginning. And beer is no different. Yeast are no different. So you want to take care of that at the start. Dropping temperature 2 to 3 degrees for final days. Right. If you're dealing with lagers, I would be very careful about how quick you are dropping the temperature. I would not, drop it very rapidly, because they can express some compounds that are add to the esterification of the beer. Yeah, I think, everything looks good, except, just don't be so aggressive in these temperatures. I think, when we're talking about this, we talked about, being mildly less than the ideal fermentation temperature and being mildly more at the end. Mm-hmm. And if you do that, I think that replaces, the concept of a diacetyl rest where you need to drive 10 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
That was kind of in the past where you needed, to be much higher. And that was because people did it at the end. If you do it during fermentation, if you hit it at the right points, if you hit your blocks where, your initial temperature is not so bad, and then you kind of let it rise, and then it's warmer at the end, and, you don't allow it to shut down at the end, then I think, you're in good shape.
Guiding versus forcing.
Yes. There you go. And that's what we do here on the Brew Strong is we guide, and sometimes
the gentle hand.
Yes. Right. We apply a gentle hand. We try not to force it, but sometimes we need to be a little more forceful. You know what I mean?
Knock it out. Yep.
All right. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you to our fine sponsors, especially Blickman Engineering, blickmanengineering.com. Again, I beg and plead that you send John at Blickman Engineering an email. You can reach him at feedback@blickmanengineering.com and tell him that you love him, that he has paid for the show, so you can have the wonderful experience of hanging with John and I.
He likes dad jokes too.
He likes dad jokes, right? He likes a lot of jokes. He is a funny guy. He is very funny, very kind, and I think that's why he's decided to provide this to you. And thanks to our folks at Brew Chatter. Check them out. Send them an email. Ping them on social media. Good folks. You would love those guys. They love this, and they're funny, kind guys. So there you go. All right, we will be back in a week. If you're listening live, it's only a week, and we will be back with more of Brew Strong. Until then, everybody, Brew Strong.
Brew Strong, everyone.